Summers span decades, winters can last a lifetime, and the struggle for the Iron Throne has begun. Hello and welcome to the Friday Fantasy Show from the Bottled Imp, exploring the realms of fantasy. My name is Ken Boyter and today we're going to be taking a look at HBO's Game of Thrones. Yes, this was first shown in 2011, and for those of you that don't know, and I'm sure there aren't that many, this was actually based on the book series A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. So, how do the two compare? Well, I've read all the books 1 to 5, the ones that have come out so far. You can check that out, we've done reviews of that. Plus, obviously, I've seen all of the TV series at the moment, but we're going to be doing the TV series one at a time because it's kind of easier. There's so much to pack in. And I first came across A Song of Ice and Fire because I was doing a short film. It was all medieval based. It was kind of like Skyrim, a bit of magic, that sort of thing. And we all dressed up with swords and looking cool. And the director said, "Have you heard of Game of Thrones?" And I said, "What is that?" And he just shook his head. And so I then ordered it off Amazon. And lo and behold, I was entered into the wonderful world of A Song of Ice and Fire, more commonly known as A Game of Thrones. But how do they compare? Why is everybody so enthused by this TV show? Let's find out. Game of Thrones, what exactly is it all about? Well, I'll just tell you now, there's loads of characters, there's loads of plot lines, it's multi-stranded, if you like, so it does pack a lot in there. It's very intense, there's a lot of action, there's loads going on, but you can basically boil it down to 3 plot lines. There's 7 kingdoms that make up one kingdom. Now, if you sit on the Iron Throne, then you are the king of all the kingdoms. There aren't any more kings, so the kingdoms are kind of old school kingdoms. But there are noble houses, so you might have heard of the Targaryens, you might have heard of the Starks, you might have heard of the Baratheon, or even the Lannisters. So you've got all these ancient and noble and some very wealthy houses that are competing for the Iron Throne. And it's all bubbling under the surface. At the moment, when we first open up with this series, the Baratheon king is sitting on the throne, and also his wife is a Lannister. So you've got the two houses have kind of merged by marriage. But, as you can imagine, underlying all of that, there's tension. Then you have a second plot strand, which is, as I mentioned before, one of the houses Targaryen. They used to be on the Iron Throne, but they were usurped by the Baratheons. And therefore the son and the daughter had to flee. So they're actually overseas, they've been exiled, but they're plotting their revenge. They want to come back onto Westeros and claim the Iron Throne for themselves. And then you have, which is basically the fantasy element, there's low-level fantasy in this to begin with anyway, and that is north of the border. You go right up to the north of Westeros, and there's a huge ice wall, and across there are the wildlings, and these are what the Westeros people call savages. They're more people that live in the forests. They, scavenge for food. They hunt. They're free folk. They're people that don't bend the knee to the king, basically. And in amongst all of that, there's an ancient, well, some would say myth, some would say it's folklore, but they are known as the White Walkers, and these creatures are basically evil. I don't want to give too many spoilers away. So you've got those 3 competing storylines, and over the course of the series, as you can imagine, they all start to blend in and to, cross each other to then complicate matters even further. There are lots of themes. This is a dense fantasy epic. As you can imagine, this is the book here. It's a thick book. There's lots going on. So to adapt this, they've done 10 hours worth. So it's 10 episodes in each series. And so you've got 10 hours to fully explore the characters and the storylines. And basically you need it. There's a lot going on. The themes, there's loads of themes. Power seems to be one of the main themes. Obviously, everyone's vying for this Iron Throne. And it's all to do with the struggle of, I guess, being, not subservient. People want to, create their own rules. They want to live the way they want to live, by their culture, by their, traditions, by their religion. So you've got each of these, as I say, these houses competing against each other. And with power, obviously comes, politics and diplomacy, that's the word, not diplodocus, diplomacy, where they have to play a kind of, softly approach to each other. So on the surface, people can be very kind, very, affable and pleasant to each other. But then underneath, you've got the politics of it all, where people are scheming, they're plotting, they're teaming up with other people, they're making alliances, they're paying people to do other things, maybe, an assassination or poison somebody, or, something that's obviously a little bit underhand, but they're going to pretend that they know nothing about it. So you've got, not only have you got the houses jostling for power, but then you've got all the other people that aren't necessarily connected to the houses also jostling for power. The civil servants, if you like. They're in there trying to get their position, trying to get closer to the centre of power as well. You've got family and heritage. Where does this power come from? Well, these noble families, and normally most of them are quite rich, or they control castles. Oh, hello, we've got somebody calling us. Maybe that's one of the Lannisters calling up to pay his debt, as their saying goes. Anyway, I'll carry on. So you have these families that are very wealthy. Sometimes they're in strategic positions, so they own castles that are very strategic. So it's very difficult then for other families to attack them, because obviously this is medieval setting. So you've got siege weapons, you've got swords, and bows are the main kind of attacking, horseback obviously. So the technology isn't that advanced. So obviously you've got castles can be very strategic. So if you own one of those and you're in a strategic position, then yes, you're going to be respected as a family. It also leads on to heritage. So it's not necessarily what you do, but it's who you are. So you could be somebody that just because you belong to one of these noble families, you then, you get a nice job, where you're paid well and you've got a lavish life. When you can be useless. So there's lots of nepotism in there as well. Now this type of life is brutal, it's harsh. There is law, there's justice, but it isn't always fair. So if the law isn't fair, think about what just everyday kind of brutality can happen without any justice being, taking place. So you could be, especially if you're lower down the chain, if you like. So if you're a farmer, if if you own an inn, if you're a baker, if you're kind of a worker, or even worse, if you're more of a slave or a serf, then there's no mobility. There's no way that you could get out of your class unless you start making loads of money, where then you can become influential, because influence is key here as well. You've also got the theme of revenge. Revenge runs through most of the houses. Everybody seems to be wanting to get revenge for past crimes, that people were murdered or thought to be murdered or killed. And there's long lines of old history between these houses. So everybody secretly is scheming, everybody wants revenge, or most people want revenge. And so that theme runs nicely along with the politics as well. Now, this book, George R. R. Martin, he's basically based this on the War of the Roses in the English history, where you had different factions fighting for the power of trying to reclaim the throne. So if you bear that in mind, you can then understand why this world is so brutal. There is no black and white. It's not just good versus evil. You get people that start out with all good intentions and are honourable, but because of the circumstance they find themselves in, they then have to make really difficult choices. And they then start getting drawn into what's known as the Game of Thrones. You either, in the Game of Thrones, as Cersei, one of the Lannisters says, the Queen, she says, you either win or you die when you play the Game of Thrones. And that is true. There doesn't seem to be any middle ground. So you have to, it basically comes down to survival. It's survival. Can you survive? How do you survive this brutal world? There's honour and loyalty. That seems to be quite prevalent. There's a lot that people put a lot of prestige in honour and loyalty. So where does that come from? Well, first and foremost, it's your family, which is why the houses are so important. Because if you can't trust and have loyalty to your family, or your family to you, then who can you have loyalty to? Now, money does talk, but only so far, because sometimes loyalty runs deeper than actually, paying somebody to be loyal to you. Mythology and folklore comes along here as well. It's all packaged beautifully by George R.R. Martin and the filmmakers. You've got the White Walkers, you've got the direwolves, you've got the grumps and the snarks, you've got origin stories of how some of the world came into existence. You've got different cultures that obviously have their different origin stories. You've got the Dothrakis, which are overseas, where the Targaryens have kind of, I don't want to give too much away, but they kind of get in with the Dothraki race, which are, again, kind of savages, but they're noble savages. They're horseback riders. They believe in fighting. It's the power, strength is God, if you like. And they've got their mythology. You've also got religions. You've got the old gods and the new gods. And so it's interesting about how religions kind of, that were once prevalent then begin to fade out. So you could say it's sort of like the pagans and the Christians, how the Christian culture then started to absorb some of the pagan rituals and festivals in order to create kind of like a semi-new religion. So you've got those rubbing along and colliding and seeing how the people react to those and the tensions that can cause. Plus there's an element of spirituality, which I would say is slightly different from religion. Religion can be like a man-made thing as such, where there's dogma and there's rules that you have to follow. Spirituality just exists. It just is. And there's a beautiful, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but there's a beautiful plot where there's actually, it shows that everything is connected. There's a connectivity between everything, between humans, between monsters, I guess, creatures, between nature. And so everything can exist, and there's an energy flow that is brought out in this. So the actual fantasy level is very low to begin with, especially in Series 1. It does increase, but it's there. It's never far away. It's talked about. There's magic. There is magic that actually does happen. And also towards the end episodes, again, I don't want to spoil it, there is some definite fantasy elements in there. It's fantastic. I can't recommend this enough. I absolutely fell in love with this. This is perfect. I can't really think of anything that's wrong with this series. They did a magnificent job adapting the book. They stick to the book very, very closely, and I think that is its secret. The book is fantastic. Check out our reviews of the book. The books seem to build a world. George R.R. Martin is brilliant at building worlds that are realistic, they're brutal, yet they do have that sense of fantasy. And like Lord of the Rings, if you ground the fantasy in reality, like really ground it into reality, then the fantasy element is accepted. It's believable. There's no, that wouldn't happen, that doesn't happen. It is totally believable. So when magic occurs, yes, you believe it. It seems real. I absolutely love this. The production values are amazing. They spent a lot of money on this, and it shows. The special effects are brilliant when they're needed. They don't dominate. The costumes are amazing. The locations are amazing. They're kind of a character in itself. A lot of it's set in Ireland. They use a lot of Irish locations. And you've got the different locations as well. So you've got Westeros, which is very medieval Europe. Then you've got the Dothraki, which is very Mediterranean. Then you've got the Wildlings and the White Walkers, which is just basically snow. It's right up north into the snow. So you've got all that kind of textures. So there's lots of visual textures all vying for your attention, and it's blended in beautifully. It really works well. The music is gorgeous as well. Honestly, it just sings to me. It's such a good show. The production values are amazing. The acting, there's so many good things about this. The acting is brilliant. The casting by Nina Gold was fantastic. They've gone for proper actors who can act. It's not about what they look like. It's about how they can act. And you know, each character you think, yeah, they just look like their character. Sean Bean is the lead, and he is brilliant. He is one of the lords of Winterfell. Well, he is the Lord of Winterfell, I should say. He's one of the noble folk. And he plays it brilliantly, very down-to-earth, very gritty. And it just works. This show is how you do fantasy on film. I can't recommend this enough. The storylines and the characters, again, fantastic. The characters, they are real, they're believable. They go on, to use the word journey. There's an arc to their story, to their characters. You can tell there's an inner conflict with them when they have to face decisions they don't really want to make. And they don't always choose the right decision. And that's what happens in life. We choose wrong decisions. We think they're right at the time, but they're not. They can turn out to be disastrous. And you have characters that are shaded. They're not black and white. So you'll get characters that you think, God, you're all right, so-and-so. And yet they'll do an act of kindness. Or you get, somebody that does an act of kindness, but then for some reason, there's a good reason, they will then do something that you feel is it's a bit out of character, it's a bit harsh. So each of them has their own motivations, and 9 times out of 10 it's selfish. And I guess if we're very honest with ourselves, we all have the capability of being selfish and thinking, what can I get out of this situation for myself? So there's loads going on here. The storylines are complex, they're intense, they're dense, they're exciting, they're intriguing, and they twist. There's unexpected things that happen. Again, I don't want to give any spoilers away, obviously. I remember reading the books and thinking and putting them down and going, I can't believe that's just happened. I need a moment to get over this. You get so drawn into this world. You get fully immersed. I can't think of any better fantasy TV show that's out there. This really has just hit the roof. This is the gold star of how to do fantasy on TV. Game of Thrones from HBO. Wow, what a series. If you haven't seen this yet, you are in for a treat, I tell you. And if you love reading fantasy, read the books as well. I watched this first, then I read all the books before I watched any more of the television series, and wow, I was blown away by it. And yes, some people have said, there's sex and there's nudity in there. There is, but it's actually for the plot. There's a few scenes that I thought, maybe that didn't need to be in there, but certainly down the line, the actual sex scenes, they're very graphic, but this is an 18, and it just adds to the brutality and the realism of the actual of life. And I would say they are justified, because it does show about character. Even in the sex scenes, it shows about the character, about how they're, having sex. It shows part of their character. Some people are, they want to show their power in sex. So I would say there's more to it than just showing, flesh. And there's male nudity as well as female nudity. It's not just, for male voyeurism. It's male and female there, and it is for a reason. So that's Game of Thrones. Thank you so much for watching. Obviously, as I said, we have done reviews of the books, so check those out. And we have reviewed some other George R.R. Martin novels as well. But until next time, remember to keep it unreal, especially if winter is coming.